I'll admit, the Veilguard certainly has a more pastel and serene appearance than where the series began, and you can no longer act like a complete sociopath with no regard for human life. But make no mistake, this game is profoundly messed up, with demonic and repulsive imagery, along with harrowingly messed up plot elements. Whilst visually the tone is more jovial than ever, the plot itself is just as desperate and hopeless as Mass Effect and Origins were. The game goes out of its way to show you how clearly outmatched you are against the gods. This is shown through the power that the gods exhibit during the story, effortlessly dismissing any and all threats to them as beneath them and unworthy of even considering a threat. And how in almost every battle you fight against them incurs heavy losses with minor victories. Weishaupt is an excellent example. You lose almost the entirety of the Grey Wardens and you fail to kill Gillenane, with only the fact that she's now mortal being your constellation prize. It doesn't instill hope, and it's a massive net loss for the player. Earlier in the game, when you have to choose between which city to save, it's made abundantly clear that whichever one you protected, you did so through a fluke, as you come nowhere close to killing the dragon. What's more is that the allies you gather to fight against the gods are far less impressive than any faction BioWare has given us before. Our army is made up of underground groups and smaller factions, with the only one that could constitute as an army, the Wardens, being decimated earlier in the story. In fact, comparing the sides that fight in Mass Effect and Origins with the armies in the Veilguard, the latter feels much more hopeless than the former. There are, however, two differences as to why this disparity might not be clear. The first, of course, is tone. The dialogue and art style are nowhere near as bleak as they previously were, which gives the game an air of Disneyness about it. The second is buildup. The game never makes it clear that we're building towards an ultimate battle. The entire trilogy of Mass Effect is spent hyping up the Reaper invasion, and Origins is all about gathering allies for the massive war that all of Ferelden will have to wage on the Archdemon. Meanwhile, the Veilguard's plot structure is about building up hope that this will be the decisive blow, just to kick you back down and show you how outmatched you truly are. Although maybe BioWare has learned from Mass Effect that building up too much hype for the finale can be fatal if you don't stick the landing. But just being outmatched is nothing new for storytelling, and it doesn't show off how dark a game can be. That's shown through imagery and narrative, and the Veilguard is truly repugnant in both regards. The imagery of the Blight is nothing short of grotesque. While it may look like a generic red glowing flesh moss when it's set against derelict castle ruins, when it's shown in contrast with human life is when it becomes truly disturbing. This is made apparent early in the game at Demeter's Crossing, where the world is twisted apart and the corpses of the elves are left hollowed out by the ravenous nature of the Blight. It's only when the corpses are littering the streets that the brutality of the Blight is on full display. But what makes Demeter's Crossing brutal from a narrative perspective is that these elves were blindly worshipping the very same being that defiled them and their families. In the same way that Lae'zel was disillusioned with her own ideology in Baldur's Gate 3, these elves had their beliefs and bodies ripped away from them in a literally gut-wrenching way. In what comes across as a disturbed move on the protagonist's side, they can leave the one responsible for allowing the Blight to befall his own town to be ripped apart by wolves, as tendrils weave into his flesh and wrap around his bones, pumping pure malice into his veins. I'm more hesitant to describe other moments in the Veilguard that are more macabre in nature, as I'm trying to be much warier of late-game spoilers, but let me assure you that the finale is artistically a Lovecraftian abomination of artwork that chills to the core. There are also several side quests that are downright disturbing, and I encourage you to seek them out once they become available. The Cabin in the Blight is a particularly disturbed questline found in the Hossberg wetlands. Other examples which will be given without context are the Formless One, the Echo in the Well, and the Cursed Mansion door that turns you into a greed-obsessed lunatic when you approach it. Whilst on the surface, the Veilguard does present itself as a more serene game than its predecessors, and I do think the art style ends up hurting the experience, this game is far more berserk than it is Fable. It doesn't lose any of the grotesque imagery that the series is known for, but it ironically guards it behind a veil of pastel. which does end up causing the tone to clash wildly. But make no mistake, this is by no means a light-hearted game. And hey, both Origins and Veilguard have the same ESRB rating, and I think those guys would know better than any internet commenter. I'll be back in 2 days. In the meantime, consider subscribing, and here's a video about the expert handling